On a frigid January morning in 2010, in a small Wisconsin town where neighbors still left their doors unlocked and children played unsupervised in snow-covered yards, a young woman vanished without a trace. Her name was Jessica Rae Patterson, 23 years old, a mother of two, a part-time waitress at the local diner, and a daughter who called her parents every Sunday without fail. She left behind her purse, her winter coat hanging on the hook by the door, and two small children who would wake that morning asking where their mother had gone. The question that would haunt the community for years wasn't just where Jessica had disappeared to, but whether the person who claimed to be searching hardest for her was the same person who knew exactly where she was all along. The town of Clearwater Springs sits in the northern stretch of Wisconsin, population just under 4,000, the kind of place where the high school football games draw half the town on Friday nights and the other half shows up at church on Sunday mornings. The landscape stretches flat and white in winter, interrupted only by clusters of bare trees and the occasional farmhouse set back from the road, smoke rising from chimneys into gray skis. Main Street runs straight through the center of town, lined with brick buildings from the 1930s, their facades weathered but still standing. The hardware store, the pharmacy, the cozy corner diner where Jessica worked the breakfast shift 3 days a week. Everyone knew everyone, or thought they did. Jessica had grown up 2 towns over in Mercer, but moved to Clearwater Springs in the summer of 2007 when she married Marcus Patterson, a mechanic at the local auto shop. Marcus was 26, tall and broad-shouldered, with hands perpetually stained with motor oil and a reputation as a hard worker who kept to himself. Those who knew him said he was quiet, the kind of man who answered questions with a nod or a few words but rarely initiated conversation. The couple lived in a small ranch house on Elm Street, white siding with green shutters, a chain-link fence around the backyard where their children, Emma age 4 and Dylan age 2, played on warm days. Jessica's days followed a predictable rhythm. Monday, Wednesday, and Friday she worked the 6 to noon shift at the diner, serving coffee and eggs to the same familiar faces, collecting tips in her apron pocket, always smiling even when her feet ached. Tuesday and Thursday she stayed home with the children, taking them to the park when weather permitted, reading them stories in the afternoon while Dylan napped. January 19, 2010, was a Tuesday. The temperature hovered around 14 degrees, the kind of cold that makes your breath visible and your fingers numb even inside gloves. Snow had fallen 3 days prior, leaving everything blanketed in white, the streets lined with dirty gray mounds pushed aside by plows. Jessica had planned to take the children to the library that afternoon, the same library where story time happened every Tuesday at 2 o'clock, and where the children's librarian, Mrs. Henderson, always saved the picture books with the brightest covers for the youngest visitors. But that morning unfolded differently. Marcus left for work at 7:30, same as always, his pickup truck rumbling to life in the driveway, exhaust visible in the cold air. Emma and Dylan were still asleep. Jessica stood at the kitchen window in her pajamas and bathrobe, coffee mug in hand, watching her husband's truck disappear down the street. The house was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of a neighbor's dog barking. She had plans to make pancakes for the children when they woke, to let them pour the syrup themselves even though it always resulted in a sticky mess. She had folded laundry the night before, the basket still sitting on the couch waiting to be put away. Her winter coat, a navy blue parka with a fake fur-lined hood, hung on its usual hook beside the front door. Her purse sat on the kitchen counter, wallet inside containing her driver's license and $32 in cash. By 8:45 that morning, according to what Marcus would later tell investigators, Jessica was gone. The call came into the Clearwater Springs Police Department at 9:17 in the morning. Marcus Patterson reported his wife missing. The dispatcher, Linda Kowalski, who had worked the desk for 12 years and prided herself on staying calm during emergencies, noted the unusual urgency in his voice. He said he had returned home because he forgot his lunch, found the front door unlocked, the children still asleep in their beds, and no sign of Jessica anywhere in the house. He said her car was in the garage, her coat still on the hook, her phone on the nightstand beside their bed. He said it didn't make sense, that she would never leave the children alone, that something had to be wrong. Deputy Sheriff Thomas Brennan arrived at the house on Elm Street at 9:32. He had been a deputy for 8 years, had responded to domestic disputes and traffic accidents and the occasional break-in, but missing persons cases were rare in Clearwater Springs. He found Marcus standing in the driveway, arms crossed against the cold, wearing his work uniform with the auto shop logo on the chest. The children were inside, Emma sitting on the couch with her blanket, Dylan playing with toy cars on the living room floor, both seemingly unaware that anything unusual had happened. Deputy Brennan walked through the house methodically. The beds were made except for the children's rooms. Dishes sat in the drying rack beside the sink. The television was off. Everything appeared normal, undisturbed, except for the absence of Jessica Patterson herself. Marcus explained that he had left for work at 7:30, realized around 8:30 that he had forgotten his lunch sitting on the counter, and decided to drive back home to get it rather than buy something. The auto shop was only 12 minutes from the house. He arrived home around 8:45, he said, noticed the front door was unlocked when it should have been locked, walked inside calling Jessica's name. The children were still asleep. He checked every room, the basement, the backyard, even walked down the street in both directions thinking maybe she had stepped outside for some reason. No sign of her. That's when he called the police. Deputy Brennan asked the questions that protocol demanded. Had they been fighting? Marcus said no. Was Jessica depressed, struggling with anything? Marcus said she seemed fine, normal, the same as always. Did she have friends she might have gone to visit? Marcus said she had a few friends from work but wouldn't leave the children alone to visit anyone. Had she mentioned wanting to leave to go anywhere? Marcus shook his head, said she had talked about taking the children to the library that afternoon, nothing more. Clear's throat, Deputy Brennan wrote everything down in his notebook, the words neat and precise, but something about the situation felt wrong in a way he couldn't yet articulate. The search began in earnest by noon. Chief of Police Robert Sullivan, who had led the small department for 15 years and knew every street and resident in Clearwater Springs, organized the initial effort. Volunteers gathered at the community center, more than 60 people by 1 o'clock, bundled in winter coats and boots, ready to walk the streets and fields calling Jessica's name. The local news station from Green Bay sent a crew by 2:30, cameras capturing footage of the searchers fanning out across snow-covered terrain, their voices echoing in the cold air. Posters appeared on telephone poles and store windows by evening, Jessica's photograph smiling out at passers-by, the word missing printed in bold letters above her name. The search teams covered a 5-mile radius that first day. They walked through the park where Jessica took her children, checked the library, knocked on doors asking if anyone had seen her that morning. The temperature dropped as the sun set, falling to single digits, and the volunteers reluctantly returned home with nothing to report. Chief Sullivan stood in the parking lot of the community center as darkness fell, his breath forming clouds in the freezing air, and told the assembled reporters that the investigation was active and ongoing, that they were following all leads, that Jessica's safe return was their top priority. Marcus Patterson gave an interview to the news cameras that first evening, standing on his front porch with the house dark behind him, his face illuminated by the camera lights. He spoke in short sentences, his voice tight with what appeared to be emotion. He said Jessica was a good mother, a good wife, that she loved their children more than anything. He said he didn't understand what had happened, that he just wanted her to come home. He asked anyone who had seen her or knew anything to please come forward. Those who watched the interview that night on the 10 o'clock news said later that something about his demeanor struck them as odd, though they couldn't say exactly what. He didn't cry. His hands stayed in his pockets. His eyes seemed focused somewhere past the camera rather than into it. The investigation in those first 48 hours followed standard procedures. Detectives from the county sheriff's department joined the local police, bringing additional resources and experience. They interviewed neighbors, co-workers, family members. Jessica's parents drove up from Illinois, her mother barely able to speak through her tears, her father demanding answers that no one could provide. Friends from the diner where Jessica worked described her as cheerful, reliable, someone who talked about her children constantly and showed pictures on her phone to anyone who would look. No one reported seeing her that Tuesday morning. No one had received a call or text from her. Her phone records showed the last activity at 11:43 the night before, a text message to her mother saying good night with a heart emoji. Detectives searched the house on Elm Street with Marcus's permission. They found no signs of struggle, no blood, no indication that anything violent had occurred. Jessica's clothes hung in the closet, her toothbrush sat in the holder in the bathroom, her shoes lined up neatly by the door. The children's rooms were cluttered with toys and books, normal for a household with young children. In the garage, Jessica's car sat untouched, a silver Honda Civic with 43,000 miles on the odometer, the interior clean except for some crumbs in the backseat and a sippy cup in the cup holder. Marcus's truck, the one he drove to work every day, sat in the driveway. Investigators noted the mileage standard procedure, though at the time it seemed merely routine. Those who knew Marcus Patterson described him in interviews as a quiet man, devoted to his work, not particularly social but not unfriendly either. His boss at the auto shop, Carl Hendricks, said Marcus showed up on time, did his job well, rarely took breaks. Coworkers said he ate lunch alone usually, reading automotive magazines or scrolling through his phone. He had lived in Clearwater Springs his whole life, attended the local high school, played on the baseball team though he wasn't a star player. His parents had moved to Arizona 5 years earlier, retired and seeking warmer weather. He had one sister who lived in Minnesota, married with children of her own. By all accounts, he was unremarkable, ordinary, the kind of person who blended into the background of a small town. But investigators began noticing inconsistencies, small details that didn't align. Marcus said he left for work at 7:30 that Tuesday morning. His time card at the auto shop showed him clocking in at 7:52, which meant he would have driven directly from home to work, a 12-minute drive. But if he forgot his lunch and returned home around 8:45, that meant he had worked for less than an hour before leaving. Coworkers interviewed later said they didn't remember seeing Marcus at the shop that morning, though the early shift was often quiet with technicians working in separate bays. Carl Hendricks checked the log and confirmed Marcus had clocked in, but said he couldn't personally verify what time Marcus actually arrived or left. Deputies whispered quietly among themselves about other observations. When they first arrived at the house, the front door had been unlocked, just as Marcus reported. But when they walked through with him, he seemed to know exactly where everything was, pointing out Jessica's coat, her purse, her phone, as if he had already cataloged what was there and what was missing. When asked again about the timeline, Marcus repeated the same story word for word, the consistency striking investigators as either the mark of someone telling the truth or someone who had rehearsed carefully. He showed no signs of panic, no frantic energy that might be expected from a spouse whose partner had vanished. He answered questions calmly, methodically, his effect flat. The search continued for days, then weeks. The initial urgency gradually faded as the calendar pages turned and no new evidence emerged. Dive teams searched nearby lakes and ponds despite the winter ice. Cadaver dogs walked through the woods surrounding Clearwater Springs, their handlers watching for any alert that might indicate human remains. The state police became involved, bringing helicopters and additional search teams. Jessica's photograph appeared on the news regularly, her case discussed on local talk radio, tips called in to the hotline that led nowhere. Marcus continued working at the auto shop, his routine seemingly unchanged except for the presence of his children now in daycare while he worked. Jessica's mother came to stay for 2 weeks, helping with the children, cooking meals, crying in the guest bedroom at night. She told investigators that Marcus seemed distant, that he didn't want to talk about Jessica, that he got irritated when she asked questions about that Tuesday morning. She said the children asked for their mother constantly, that Emma had nightmares, that Dylan carried around a stuffed animal that had been Jessica's favorite to give him. She said Marcus told her not to talk to the children about their mother being gone, that it would only upset them more. Physical evidence remained frustratingly absent. No body, no blood, no witnesses who saw anything unusual that morning. The case file grew thick with interview transcripts and search reports and forensic analyses that revealed nothing conclusive. Chief Sullivan held fewer press conferences as January turned to February, then March. The volunteers stopped gathering at the community center. The posters on telephone poles faded and tore in the spring rains. Jessica Patterson's disappearance became a cold case, the kind of mystery that people in Clearwater Springs would mention occasionally, usually in hushed tones, wondering what really happened to that young mother who vanished on an ordinary Tuesday morning. For those who have ever doubted someone you love, who have felt that creeping suspicion that the person sleeping beside you might be hiding something darker than you could imagine, the months that followed Jessica's disappearance would have felt familiar. Marcus Patterson continued living in the house on Elm Street, raising his children, going to work, existing in a routine that appeared normal from the outside. But investigators never stopped watching him, never stopped believing that he knew more than he had said. The breakthrough, when it finally came, arrived not from forensic evidence or witness testimony, but from the smallest voice in the household. By the fall of 2010, nearly 10 months after Jessica's disappearance, Emma Patterson was 5 years old, attending kindergarten at Clearwater Springs Elementary School. Her teacher, Mrs. Linda Chen, noticed that Emma was quieter than the other children, prone to sitting alone during free play, drawing pictures that always seemed to feature the same elements: a house, a car, stick figures. Mrs. Chen had been teaching for 22 years and had learned to recognize when a child was carrying something heavy inside them. One afternoon in late October, during art time, Emma drew a picture that made Mrs. Chen pause. The drawing showed a figure lying down, another figure standing nearby, and what appeared to be a shovel. When Mrs. Chen asked Emma gently about the drawing, Emma said it was from when her daddy took a trip. She said her daddy had gone away early one morning before she woke up, and when he came back he had dirt on his clothes and his hands were dirty. She said he told her not to tell anyone about the trip because it was a secret. Mrs. Chen, following the protocols required of teachers who suspect something concerning, reported the conversation to the school counselor, who in turn contacted Child Protective Services. By November, detectives were once again sitting across from Marcus Patterson, But this time their questions carried a different weight. They asked about trips he had taken in January. They asked about his truck, about the mileage, about whether he had driven anywhere unusual that morning when Jessica disappeared. They asked about dirt on his clothes, about shovels, about secrets he might have told his daughter to keep. Marcus denied everything. He said Emma was confused, that she was a child with an active imagination, that she sometimes mixed up dreams with reality. He said he had never taken any trips that morning, had never told her to keep secrets. He offered to take a polygraph test, which he did in December, the results coming back inconclusive, neither clearly indicating deception nor truthfulness. The investigation, which had seemed ready to close, suddenly had new energy, new direction, new purpose. Detectives obtained warrants to search Marcus's property more thoroughly than before. In January 2011, exactly 1 year after Jessica's disappearance, forensic teams descended on the house on Elm Street with ground-penetrating radar and cadaver dogs and excavation equipment. Neighbors stood in their yards watching, some with arms crossed, some with hands covering their mouths. The search focused on the backyard, where the radar indicated a disturbance in the soil beneath what had been, a year earlier, a snow-covered lawn. They found her on January 23, 2011. Jessica Rae Patterson, buried 4 feet deep in the backyard of her own home, wrapped in a blue tarp, her body preserved enough by the winter cold that identification was possible. The medical examiner would later determine that she had been strangled, that her injuries were consistent with manual strangulation, that she had likely been deceased since the day she disappeared. Marcus Patterson was arrested that same day, handcuffed in the parking lot of the auto shop where he worked, his coworkers watching through the garage bay doors. He was charged with first-degree intentional homicide. He maintained his innocence, told detectives they were making a mistake, said he had no idea how Jessica's body ended up in his backyard. His public defender would later argue that the evidence was circumstantial, that the timeline couldn't be proven, that Marcus's daughter's statements were unreliable coming from a traumatized 5-year-old child. But the case that prosecutors built was methodical and devastating. They reconstructed the timeline of that Tuesday morning in January 2010, using Marcus's time card, the odometer reading from his truck, which showed 73 additional miles that couldn't be accounted for by his claimed route to and from work, and cell phone tower data that placed his phone near the house during the time he claimed to be at the auto shop. They presented evidence that Marcus had purchased a tarp and a shovel from the hardware store 3 weeks before Jessica's disappearance, items he claimed were for a home improvement project that was never started. They called witnesses who testified about Marcus's unusual calmness after Jessica vanished, his lack of emotion, his resistance to discussing her or the investigation. Emma Patterson, now 6 years old, was interviewed by child forensic specialists using techniques designed to be gentle and non-leading. She told them, in her own words, about waking up early one morning and seeing her daddy in the backyard before the sun came up. She said he was digging. She said he told her to go back to bed, that it was a secret, that she couldn't tell anyone. She drew more pictures during the interviews, always showing the same elements: the house, the yard, a figure with a shovel. The trial began in September 2011, 19 months after Jessica's disappearance. The courtroom in the county seat filled every day with spectators, reporters, and Jessica's family members who sat in the front row behind the prosecution table. Marcus's sister came from Minnesota to support him, sitting alone on the defense side, her face drawn and pale. The proceedings lasted 3 weeks, testimony presented day after day, expert witnesses explaining forensic evidence, investigators describing their suspicions and discoveries, Jessica's mother taking the stand and breaking down as she described the daughter she had lost. Marcus Patterson took the stand in his own defense, something his attorney had advised against but which he insisted upon. He maintained his innocence, said he loved Jessica, that he would never have harmed her. He said he didn't know who buried her in the backyard, that someone must have done it while he was at work, that he was being framed. His testimony lasted 2 days, cross-examination revealing inconsistencies in his account, his calm demeanor striking the jury as either the sign of a truthful man or a calculated liar. The jury deliberated for 14 hours over 2 days. On October 7, 2011, they returned a verdict of guilty on all counts. Marcus Patterson stood as the verdict was read, his face expressionless, while Jessica's mother sobbed openly behind him. The judge sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole, stating that the evidence showed premeditation, cruelty, and a complete disregard for the value of Jessica's life and the welfare of their children. Those who believed Marcus was innocent from the beginning, a small group including his sister and a few friends, maintained that the conviction was a rush to judgment, that the evidence could have been interpreted differently, that a grief-stricken community needed someone to blame and Marcus was the convenient target. But those who had suspected him from that first day, who noticed his strange calmness and the inconsistencies in his story, felt vindicated. They said they had known all along that there was something wrong about how he behaved, that an innocent spouse would have been frantic and desperate, not composed and detached. The children, Emma and Dylan Patterson, were placed in the custody of Jessica's parents, who moved them to Illinois to start a new life away from Clearwater Springs and the house where their mother had been buried. Emma received counseling for years, working through the trauma of losing her mother and the knowledge that her father had been responsible. Dylan, too young to remember much of those early years, grew up with photographs of a mother he barely knew and the heavy knowledge of how she had been taken from him. The house on Elm Street sat empty for months after the trial, eventually sold at a significant loss, the new owners aware of its history but hoping to create new memories in a place marked by tragedy. The community of Clearwater Springs struggled to reconcile how someone who had lived among them, who had seemed so ordinary, could have committed such an act. The conversations continued in the diner, at church, in the grocery store aisles, people asking each other how they didn't see it, how they didn't know, whether there were signs they all missed. Chief Sullivan, who retired 2 years after the case closed, gave one final interview to a local journalist in which he said that some cases haunt you not because of their complexity, but because of their simplicity. He said that Marcus Patterson had strangled his wife in their home, buried her in the backyard, dropped their children at daycare, and gone to work as if nothing had happened. He said the only reason Marcus was caught was because a 5-year-old girl was braver than anyone could have expected, willing to tell a truth that her father had commanded her to keep secret. The case of Jessica Rae Patterson closed officially in 2011, but for those who loved her, the wound never fully healed. Her parents visit her grave every week, a small headstone in a cemetery in Illinois far from the place where she died. Her friends from the diner still talk about her sometimes, remembering her smile and her stories about her children and the way she always hummed while she poured coffee. Emma and Dylan carry her memory forward, 2 lives forever marked by a January morning when their mother vanished, and their father showed them that evil doesn't always announce itself with obvious signs. For those who have noticed the way someone stands too still when they should be moving, who have felt the wrongness of composure in moments that demand emotion, who have learned that the most dangerous lies are the ones told with the calmest voices, the Patterson case serves as a reminder that truth sometimes hides in plain sight, waiting for someone small and brave enough to bring it into the light. Justice for Jessica Patterson came not from sophisticated forensic techniques or dramatic courtroom revelations, but from a child's drawing, a teacher's concern, and investigators who refused to stop asking questions, even when the answers seemed impossible to find. In the end, the community that had been shocked by Jessica's disappearance was shocked again by how close the truth had been all along, living in the house on Elm Street, sleeping in the bed beside where she used to sleep, raising the children they had created together, while her body lay buried beneath the winter grass in the backyard. If this story mattered to you, subscribe and hit the bell. Share the episode. Someone somewhere may still be waiting to be heard.